It's the second in our series on today, and this is called Evening and Morning. Remember the last devotional, the people complained and wished they were back, being enslaved because they were being pursued by a huge enemy that was seeking to kill them all. Now they're safely across the sea, their enemies have drowned, and they're in a desert, and they find themselves hungry, and they accuse Moses of bringing them out of slavery only to starve them to death. One would think after that incredible deliverance that these people received yesterday, then today they would be in peace, even when they're in need. But that doesn't seem to be the way we operate. Last time we looked at those pining and longing for yesterday, and it made the people question God's goodness today. And in this story, we're looking at forgetting about what God did yesterday and how it brings complaints and unrest for the day. Geez, how quickly we forget the character of our God. God heard their complaints again, and you know the story. He answered their request for food, and he rained down bread from heaven, amazing provision again, a miracle they could witness with their eyes. They were going to have meat in the evening and bread in the morning, and it says when Moses delivered this news, they looked up and saw the Lord's glory in the clouds. I read this really cool description of God's glory. It says they saw his presence, his essence, his wonder, and his weight. Clouds symbolize God's care over us. We have them daily. They shade the hot sun, they bring rain, they march across the sky with the wind. They literally speak provision. Every day of our lives, clouds are present somewhere. And on a cloudless day, then the brilliance of the sun is so bright we can't even look up. And when the clouds are so thick and cover the entire sky, it would be silly to wonder if the sun went away, wouldn't it? Of course, we know the sun is behind the clouds always, and we never fear that it's not there. However, when clouds of hunger filled these wanderers' bellies, they figured God had abandoned them, and they failed to see his cloud of provision that appeared daily, morning and night. God had told them to gather as much as they needed of his provision and not to keep any for the next day. And those that did, well, maggots appeared, and it smelled bad, and Moses was angry that the people disobeyed God's instructions to gather today and not for tomorrow. But what is interesting is that they were told to gather some and put it in a jar for generations to come, so that they could see that God provided for his people in the wilderness. One thing God was making sure his people knew was his character. He was the provider, not the leaders or anything they could do. All provision and sustenance came from him. This was the lesson they were to know daily, every day, not to give glory to another, but to look up where their help came from and to eat and give thanks morning and night. He also wanted them to know he was a personal God, attentive, the one who provides and keeps them satisfied, and that provision and personal attention will arrive every single day. Remember the line in the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread"? It's an important part of settling our souls to walk with him and receive what we need today, and it will be enough. I read this in a commentary by Matthew Henry. Let them learn to go to bed and sleep quietly, though they have not a bit of bread in their tent, nor in their camp, trusting that God, with the following day, will bring them their daily bread. Think about the popularity of farmers markets. I, for one, love them. There's no greater fun than taking a bag, browsing all the produce of the season, gathering it up and taking it home, and then preparing that fresh goodness. It's the most satisfying of all food, much better than the frozen and boxed varieties that the store offers that will last for months on your shelves. Sometimes we've bought too much fresh produce, that which we can't eat while it's fresh and it spoils. But our culture isn't like that. We only have markets set up weekly. Because of our lifestyles, it's hard for us to sustain our lives with what's fresh. We've become accustomed to and actually prefer the food that can sit on our shelves for longevity and convenience instead. And that's what the people wanted. They wanted to gather and hoard and make sure they had enough for tomorrow instead of living for today. And the final part of this story is so interesting, is that God did have a time and a portion for them to store up to tell the generations to come of God's provision in the wilderness. I think that's so cool. That which they gathered in fear of tomorrow turned to waste and attracted maggots. But that which they gathered to share of God's goodness to the generations stayed in the jar and spoke volumes to their children. There's something huge to learn from receiving from God's hand today and receiving that daily bread morning and night and giving thanks. I read that manna could be prepared lots of different ways. It was totally full of what they needed because it came from God's hand daily. So to end this Devo, let's observe the clouds and their weight and their presence. Let's look for God's provision today. Let's stoke the fires of gratitude for what He gives us today and stand amazed at how it's always enough and oh so good. And why not visit a local farmer's market with your bag in hand and fill it up and enjoy it this week?